Welcome to Question Time. Tonight we're in Kettering. On tonight's panel, Suella Braverman, the Government's Attorney-General for England and Wales, previously Brexit Minister under Theresa May, and, as a result of a change in the law, the first Cabinet Minister to receive paid maternity leave. Labour's Shadow Health and Social Care Secretary, former President of the National Union of Students and a local councillor before becoming an MP, Wes Streeting. Ukrainian politician and People's Deputy for the centrist Holos or Voice Party, lawyer and lifelong political activist. She and her family continue to live in Ukraine despite the Russian invasion, Lesia Vasylenko. Sir Max Hastings, historian and prolific author, including of books on both world wars, Vietnam and the Falklands, and former editor of the Daily Telegraph. And Church of England parish priest, Radio 4 broadcaster, and in the 1980s, creator of a slew of top 10 hits as one half of the pop group The Communards, the Rev Richard Coles. Good evening, welcome to my panel, welcome to the audience here in Kettering, very good to see you, and of course welcome to you at home. Do join in the conversation the usual way on social media, at BBC Question Time, and let's hear what you've got to say on tonight's topics. Right, our first question tonight is from Mark Belcher.
Even with peace talks progressing, is it inevitable that Russian troops will occupy large parts of Ukraine for decades to come?
Well, Lesia, as we have you here, just a day before you head back to Ukraine, what is your response to that question?
Russian troops will continue to escalate their aggression against Ukraine. This is Putin's stance. Ukraine cannot exist as an independent country in Putin's eyes, and he's doing everything to destroy the Ukrainian population as we speak. So, in fact, what we do is we stand together and we stand united as a country, as a people. And right now in Ukraine, freedom is being forged under the missiles and under the rockets and under the bombs. And it's for that freedom, for the support of that freedom, that we Ukrainians appeal to the world day in, day out to come and stand with us and to come and help democracy prevail in the world and combat the empires trying to come back, the empires being Putin trying to build something bigger than Russia ever was during the Soviet times, during the empiristic times. And this is essentially what we are fighting against. And this is what we want the world to come and stand with us against.
And you had a meeting with Boris Johnson today.
That is true,
I think.
Yes.
And did you feel encouraged by what he had to say to you? Did you come away with what you wanted?
We are very much hoping as a country that other partner states or states who are considering themselves to be partners of Ukraine would come forward and actually help us stand up against Russia. We understand completely that that's not going to happen within the UN structure because Russia is a permanent member with a veto power of the Security Council. We understand also NATO's stance that sort of, okay, we'll be on the sidelines, we'll declare ourselves leaders of the free world, but we'll just look on how you get along. So essentially now the message that myself and other members of the Ukrainian delegation were sending is that we want an anti-Putin coalition to be in place, and we would like the UK to actually take a leading role on that. The other countries which are available and happy to go into this coalition are the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, who have declared already today that they are happy with the no-fly zone over Ukraine, especially over the most hazardous facilities which are located in Ukraine. We have the Czech Republic, we have Poland, who are sort of considering the same kind of position, but there needs to be leadership around that, and it's the strategic partner and the strong country that the UK is that we rely most upon on this matter. So anti-Putin coalition is the message that we put forward today as a Ukrainian delegation to the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and we hope that this will come together in the days to come.
Well, Max, I want to come to you in terms of your sort of military historian hat on, if you like. The question is, even with peace talks going on, is it inevitable that Russian troops will end up occupying part of what is now Ukraine?
It feels almost impertinent to say anything when we're witnessing the rape of your country and when we're seeing the terrible sufferings that your people are undergoing. For us who are incredibly privileged spectators, because all of us are here in the warm tonight, one has to be, we're all a bit humbled in anything we say, but on the other hand, in fairness to Ukraine as much as to anything, I don't think we must make any promises that we can't keep. In peacetime, words are cheap, and politicians, all our politicians, use words very cheaply. We're now in a very serious situation. I personally think we're at the beginning of something that is going to go on for a very long time. I think that we're going to find the West has had to awaken from a very long sleep in which we have watched these authoritarian powers rise up all around us, and we've cut our defence budgets while making irresponsible, vague promises about expanding NATO. And now suddenly reality has struck us. And yes, I believe in the end, what we have to remember, all wars end in conversations. And sooner or later, there's going to have to be some sort of talks with this loathsome man who is raping your country.
How do you see those talks, though? I'm sorry, I'm sort of taking on, because I hear this question so many times that you have to talk. Actually, to tell you the truth, the Russian aggression didn't start 22 days ago. The Russian aggression against Ukraine started 8 years ago, on the 20th of February 2014. And for 8 years, we have been listening on different platforms. You must continue the dialogue. We continued the dialogue. This dialogue led to the fact that we have besieged cities. A city, Volnovakha, 100,000 people, is no more. It's a city no more.
Nobody could dispute. It's unbelievably difficult. I've just finished writing a book on the Cuban Missile Crisis. It is more difficult to talk to Putin than it was to talk to Nikita Khrushchev in 1962.
But to answer Lesia's question, how do you see it ending?
I personally think, we all have an enormous admiration for the manner in which Ukraine is today defending itself. Now, I do not believe it's possible to win military victory over the Russian army. I just don't think it's doable. The Russians are so strong. And also, they may yet use horrible weapons in this war. But what Ukraine is doing, which I think is the best grounds for hope, is it's establishing facts on the ground by the terrific hammering that you've given the Russians, which may at some point make Putin a little bit more disposed to make some sort of reasonable settlement. But we all know that in justice, he should get nothing out of these terrible things he's done. But unfortunately, the whole lesson of history is that at some point everybody has to talk, but it is very difficult. And I feel almost ashamed of myself in your presence saying that.
Well, shall we hear a bit from our audience as well, Lesia? It might be interesting to hear what people have got to say. The man at the back in the check shirt.
Would it not have been better to get round the table before the war started, rather than everybody will be around the table at the end of it?
OK, the man there with the beard. Yes.
What will it take for the Western powers to take military action towards the Russian aggression in Ukraine?
OK, and the man there in the dark jacket.
I was going to ask about military action, having Afghanistan, Iraq and Yugoslavia and served there. Why aren't we going in? I just don't understand.
So you served in those wars and you think we should go in?
Yes.
And in terms of the fears that NATO has expressed about triggering a third world war, what's your view on that?
It feels like the politicians were doing this in Bosnia, and then when we had war crimes and everything out there, then we did something. We should do something now.
Do you want to answer that, Suella?
On whether NATO should respond militarily at the moment. Well, the UK government and NATO has been clear. It's obviously, and I should just say, it's an actual honour to share a panel with you, and as Max has said, very humbling to see the heroism of you and your people in the face of the adversity and the evil inflicted upon you by Vladimir Putin. We've made it clear that NATO is a defensive alliance. We're proud to have been a founding member of NATO, and we are providing huge resources on that side of the border. We've got a big presence in Estonia. We've got UK contributions. Article 5 is clear that an attack on a NATO nation will be an attack on all nations. And if Putin crosses that line, NATO will respond forcefully. But until then, we will do everything in our might to support the Ukrainians in their self-defence. And that's why I'm really proud of the UK leadership that we've demonstrated in arming the Ukrainians with missiles, the NLAWs, the Javelins, the Starstreaks, and so much so that the Ukrainians shout, "God save the Queen."
And to the main question, Suella, is it inevitable, despite the peace talks, that Russian troops, or that Russia will end up occupying large parts of Ukraine for years to come?
I don't think that's inevitable. When it comes to peace talks, actions speak louder than words. And we've seen the duplicity of Putin. We've seen how he has treated his own nationals with disregard. We've seen how he's ridden roughshod over the Minsk protest, which had process which had commitments to the rule of law and democracy. This man cannot be trusted. However, as Max clearly says, you know, we want a peaceful outcome. I will only judge a deal on the terms that they are struck if the Ukrainian people agree to them and if they are persuaded by Putin's credibility. But what's important in a negotiation is that the Ukrainians can negotiate from a position of strength. And that's why it's vital that we arm them. That's why it's vital and it's brilliant that they are putting up such a doughty resistance to Putin at the moment. This is not going according to his plan. He is losing resources. His troops are losing morale. There's every chance that the Ukrainians can keep putting up this fight. It is heartbreaking. It is tough. But we are there side by side with the Ukrainian as long as this goes on.
Thank you for that.
Woman back there with the glasses. Yes.
I just wanted to say that I don't know how you can reason with somebody like Putin who can't see reason, otherwise he wouldn't behave in the way he's behaved. And I agree with the gentleman at the front. I don't understand on a humanitarian level why we don't do something to sit and watch what's going on and the suffering. You know, even more so because we have social media as well as watching the news and things like that. It's terrible, and it shouldn't be about, I understand the NATO part of it, but it shouldn't be about that. It should be, you know, if that was my country, I would want somebody to come in and help, because what's going on is just atrocious.
Okay. Yes, the woman here in the front. Yes, you with the blonde hair.
What is the difference between us supplying a lot of weapons, obviously, to fight Ukraine, and saying that we won't agree to closing the airspace?
Wes, do you want to take that? Because you don't support going in. The Labour Party is taking the same line as the government, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with Suella, and I'm not uncomfortable because we're agreeing across party lines and normally be having an argy-bargy on the programme. I actually think it's a strength of politics in this country and across the NATO alliance that we are standing together, united in the face of Russian aggression.
But to take that woman's point there, though...
I certainly will. I'm uncomfortable because I'm on the platform with Lesia, a parliamentary colleague from Ukraine, effectively refusing a request that she's making to us this week, that her president has made to our country, that the people of Ukraine are making to the entire NATO alliance. And it is uncomfortable because we want to do more to help. The difference between where we are now and where we would be if we were enforcing a no-fly zone is declaring war on Russia and conceding that we are turning a war between Ukraine and Russia into, at the very least, a new European war and quite possibly a third world war. And I don't think it's worth countenancing. There are red lines. Putin knows full well that if a Russian steps 1 foot across the border into NATO territory, that will be considered an act of war against NATO, and he'll feel the full force of NATO unity in response, which is why he's not doing it. He knows, because the United States government has made it clear just this week, that if the Russians use chemical weapons, that will be seen as an intolerable act and will be met with severe consequences. So we're not agreeing to a no-fly zone right now. That does mean, however, the other things we are doing, we have to get the maximum impact from it. That means going further and faster on sanctions, so we tighten the grip around the throat of Putin and his regime economically. And already we've seen fights in the supermarkets in Russia this week because his people are suffering because of his actions. And it does mean we need to supply arms to Ukraine to give them the best possible chance of holding the Russian lines back. This war is not going as Putin would have expected. His generals are dying. Russian families are grieving for young men who have been sent ill-equipped and ill-trained into a war that they didn't choose to fight. But every single general and every single soldier engaged in this conflict needs to know that if war crimes are perpetrated, and there is evidence of this, it won't just be Putin facing action in The Hague, it will be every Russian general and soldier responsible. Okay. And in the end, the Russian people have to ask themselves, is this war really worth the price they are paying, both in terms of blood and the loss of families in Russia, but also the crushing impact it's having on their economy? And that's how in the end, we will force Putin back, and I hope force a negotiated settlement where Ukraine wins the war, protects their democracy, their freedom and their self-determination.
Richard, I'm just wondering what you're thinking sitting here with this, because the common theme here is that you all feel uncomfortable because we're talking about something which we're not experiencing. Lesia's sitting here, you're going to go back, pick up your gun, which I know you have, and you have to actually do this thing, whereas we are all sitting talking about it. What's your view?
Well, I'm deeply uncomfortable too, but it does occur to me that there is another scenario, perhaps. I don't want to appear complacent about what's happening to your country, Lesia, at all, far from it. But I was in Moscow in August 1991. I travelled the length of the country from east to west, happened to be there when the coup against Gorbachev collapsed. I witnessed the end of Soviet communism. I stood in front of the Lubyanka prison, headquarters of the KGB, and I watched the statue of Jasinski pulled down. A crowd turned up with a crane and they pulled it down. I watched it with a friend of mine who was Ukrainian, and he said to me, "Tyrants can fall." And I'm wondering if the most effective thing we can do outside your country is not necessarily take risks which would escalate militarily a situation which is extremely difficult in a world which is extremely dangerous, but actually through precisely what Wes was saying, through economic sanctions, through political isolation, encourage Russians to turn to Putin and to begin to maybe dislodge him from power, to wrest his grip.
How long do you think that will take?
I don't know, but tyrants can fall, and when it happens very quickly. In Moscow in 1991, I don't think anybody thought, even weeks before, that the Communist Party would all of a sudden evaporate, and that hugely powerful system would all of a sudden fail, but it did.
It didn't fall just because it fell just in a couple of days. There was precursors to that, and there was preparation to that, which was going on for years and years. And I think that we have Max here who can tell you the historical side of things. But I can tell you what you're saying. I agree with you completely, but it's a parallel track. So there's a track which is on defense and security, and there's the other one on the weakening of Russia from the inside. They go together, they go along. If Russia stays strong, if those sanctions wouldn't have been introduced, Russia would have continued to build on their military strengths. And every penny spent, I just want to say this to everyone, every penny spent on Russian goods, on Russian services, actually buys bullets that kill Ukrainian children and kill Ukrainian people. So the first thing that anyone can do is actually stop all kinds of economic relations with Russia. And the UK has been really good with it, apart from maybe a couple of companies such as British Tobacco and Marks and Spencer's.
And you mentioned Marks and Spencer's because? Because they are still located in Russia, and they still have shops and operations in Russia. I mean, they're saying there's a complex franchise arrangement, which means they have to stay there. But what are you saying? People should not be buying Marks and Spencer's goods here in the UK? Is that what you mean? What I'm saying is that you can make your own conclusions, but every penny spent on anyone who stays in Russia, pays taxes there, is buying bullets that kill Ukrainian children.
I hate to be sympathetic to our politicians, but I think that they face acute dilemmas which we have to recognise now about proportionality. That because I'm a historian, I think back that the world had to witness in 1939 Stalin invading Finland, seizing a chunk of Finland, and we had to stand by. Churchill wanted to bomb Stalin. One of the few sensible things Neville Chamberlain did was he said, we haven't worked out how to defeat Hitler yet, we better hold off from going to war with Stalin as well. Since then, our parents and grandparents had to watch the Hungarian uprising being brutally crushed, the Prague Spring being brutally crushed. Why didn't we intervene militarily? Because the danger of global nuclear war was deemed too great. And all the time we have to be asking ourselves, what is the least bad outcome of this horrible, horrible story? And the one thing that's certain is the worst outcome is general war between Russia and the West. And so I deeply sympathise. Our politicians, I think, have so far made the right calls with sanctions, with supplying arms. I don't think we can have no-fly zones. I don't think that we can send jets. And this is awful to have to say in your company. But we have to all the time. This has to seek to prevent escalation. There's a very good line during the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62 when John F. Kennedy, sitting around the cabinet table, when everybody felt the world was on the brink of nuclear war, And he said to his advisors sitting around, he said, well, this is the day we've got to make a decision. You better hope that your option isn't the one that's adopted. And it's always the difficulty of trying to find the least bad option in these terrible situations. We just have to sympathise with the people in charge, just this once.
Woman here.
I think we have to remember that people in the UK have already been killed by Putin. Don't forget about Salisbury. Yeah. That man is capable of anything. And I think as much support as we can possibly give, I mean, they say that, you know, we can't go in because a member of NATO hasn't been attacked by him. He's already done that. He came to Salisbury.
So listening to what Max is saying, is that and this is the reason why politicians haven't gone in, for fear of triggering a third world war and possibly a nuclear attack. Does that not put you off?
Gosh, I don't want to be responsible for the Third World War. I do think we have to be incredibly cautious, but I actually back a no-fly zone around Ukraine, because there's so many sites there that, you know, you've got the former Chernobyl site, and look what he's doing to that. I don't think that a no-fly zone would be a particularly bad idea at all. I mean, you just have to remember when that horrific Korean flight that got downed, it was a passenger jet that got downed. I don't think a no-fly zone is a bad idea at all. I don't see why we can't support a no-fly zone. I don't think putting boots on ground would be perhaps, you know, a step too far, but I don't see why a no-fly zone is unreasonable.
All right, let me just hear a little bit more from the audience. Yes, there's a woman there with her hand up. Yes, did you want to come in? You had your hand up for an awful long time, I noticed.
I was going to make the same point.
Oh, okay.
Not crossed the red line.
Not to worry. The man there in the pink shirt.
It just seems so morally wrong that a Ukrainian life just seems to be so worthless. Yeah, none of us want to sort of think about World War III, but like you've all said, if Putin was mad enough, and I don't think he is, to step inside a NATO country, we're there like a shot. So far, is it roughly 5,000 people in Ukraine have been killed, including soldiers?
Of course, we can't know the true figure.
Do we want to sit here in 6 months' time and say, oh, it's up to 50,000 now, so, OK, we'll give it a bit longer?
OK, and the man there, yes, in the glasses. Yes, you've got the microphone hanging over your head, sir, there.
Hi.
Yes.
Myself. I feel as though a lot of us, the general population at large, are badly informed on the background to this conflict. And I feel certainly that there should be more information out there. And for example, I understand that Putin's, one of his reasons for attacking was that he was assured that NATO wouldn't embrace Ukraine. And I'd just be interested to know what Ukraine's position was 8 or 10 years ago when that was apparently the case.
Did the government, did NATO give that affirmation? Suella, do you know? Did anyone know here? Max, do you know? Was Putin reassured that NATO would take a step back?
Putin could never be reassured about anything. I mean, he's a paranoid type of individual. This is not me saying this. This is like psychiatrists and psychologists who do the analysis of the personality. And really, he feels threatened by anyone and anything. In the 90s, Putin was actually saying that Lithuania was posing a threat to Russia's defense and security. And he put it into the Russian defense and security strategy that they are enemy number one and that they pose a threat. What did Lithuania have in the 1990s after the Soviet Union broke apart? Well, it was just a bunch of hunters with hunting guns, and these guys were apparently threatening the second largest army in the world and the nuclear power at that. So essentially, when Putin says that, okay, he feels threatened by Ukraine and Ukrainians' free will to join any kind of alliance that they want, this just doesn't make sense. We could never be a threat to Russia.
I think one thing we can all agree on very readily is that there is absolutely no shred of justification for anything that Putin has done in Ukraine. The folly of Western policy is that for 20, 30 years, on the one hand, we were making vague proposals for the expansion of NATO, and on the other hand, we were slashing our defense budgets. And Putin interpreted our defence cuts. All the nations, the Germans almost completely disarmed themselves. Putin, who only understands strength, Russia's got 3 exports: oil, gas, and extreme violence. And Putin understood us as being frightened, as being feeble, as being wet. And so we've had 20 years of policy which have contributed to making Putin feel that he could do what he is doing to your country.
Let's take another question, still on the topic of Ukraine. Before I do, I just need to tell you, if you'd like to be in the audience for next week's programme, next week we will be in Reading, and the following week we will be in Bath. If you want to come and add your voice to these here, do apply it to go to the Question Time website. You can follow the link there. So next week Reading, the week after that Bath, and we would love to see you. Let's take a question now from Clover. Clover Walton, where are you?
I wanted to ask, why do I have to name a refugee before I can offer them sanctuary in my home? Because this just slows down their passage to safety. And I want to know when the government will introduce a basic matching scheme between people who need homes and people who are offering homes.
Suella, you better kick us. Why does Clover have to name someone in order to be able to offer a home to a Ukrainian refugee?
Well, the matching process is essential if we want to enable the Ukrainian refugees to find homes and be accommodated in the UK. And that's why we've set up this new scheme this week, the Homes for Ukraine scheme. Absolutely delighted that over 100,000 British people have signed up to offer their homes. Great reflection of our generosity and goodwill here. The reality is that actually there are so many charitable organisations, third sector organisations, which have the expertise, which have these skills to effectively and quickly, because that's the priority, we want to do this at pace, to quickly match up people to homes.
But it's a two-stage process, isn't it, Suella? So if you go on the website, have you tried to do this, Clover?
Yes.
So what's your experience been?
I've signed up, I've expressed interest, I've received an email directing me to a website that says you can sign up and express interest, but nothing more. I've also registered our home as being available with 4 different charitable organisations, but at the moment there's nothing coming from that. So we're not seeing. We know there are people that need homes. We know that Poland is overwhelmed. We know that Moldova, one of the poorest countries in Europe, has got 90,000 refugees, I think. And I'm offering a space in our home, and it's not being taken up. And I want to accelerate that process.
So why have you got a situation where someone like Clover, who very generously is offering room to people from Ukraine, but you can only get so far on the government website, and then you have to yourself go off and look for different charities and hope that you're registering with the right ones and that they will come back with a name? Why not make it much more straightforward?
Well, it's great that you signed up, and as I said, that's the first phase. As of tomorrow, there'll be a next phase where people who've signed up will then be contacted, there'll be a lot more liaison, and then we hope to have the matching process take place very quickly. After that, there'll be £350 given to those who are housing Ukrainians. Local councils will get funding to support Ukrainians.
But she'll still have to find the name, won't she? I mean, that's where it comes down to.
Yes, ultimately, she will need to make that effort,
Richard.
but that is not going to be insurmountable, and we're going to make it really easy in terms of the checks and the processes for the Ukrainian people to get here quickly.
But yesterday, a Ukrainian family were reunited in this county near Northampton. Valentina and Slava, their sister Anna, arrived from Ukraine via Romania with her 2 children. We were delighted to welcome her. But she described trying to work with the British Home Office as, her words, mission impossible. And I think it's been really, really frustrating and embarrassing that the rest of Europe opens its borders with no requirement for visas to refugees from Ukraine, and we don't. I'm really glad that's changing now. And I think it's really good that there's some encouraging noises from the Refugees Minister and also from Michael Gove, which I think is going to connect with the grassroots effort which you've been talking about, Clover. My church is signed up to Sanctuary Foundation. We as individuals are signed up to Sanctuary Foundation. I have Ukrainian parishioners who are dealing directly with people in my parish who want to offer hospitality to Ukrainian refugees, dealing directly with them in Ukraine. But I still get this feeling of enormous frustration that that's not been streamlined at a governmental level. It's happening very efficiently, I think, at a grassroots level, but it really does need to be prioritised and pushed through, because we really need to up our game here, I think.
So Wes, Clover's point is that she can sign on with the government website, but she still has to go and find a name herself through a charity or whatever organisation. Is Labour suggesting anything different?
Well, I think the best thing the government could do is to work with specialists in this area. There are some brilliant charities out there. Richard's just described one, but there are many others who have the expertise. Local authorities have the relationships at a community level, are able to do things like welfare inspections with resource. I'm glad Suella's mentioned the issue of resources for local authorities.
But would you streamline the process? Hang on a second. Would you streamline the process so that Clover doesn't have to go through these two different procedures?
You can't have a situation where, you know, people are effectively scouring the internet to try and find people in need. And I've got to say, in my sort of 6 years or so of being a member of a parliament, the worst organisation I ever have to deal with is the Home Office, because they have never managed to humanely deal with people in the immigration process.
So just briefly, what would Labour do differently before I move on?
Or asylum. Well, I've just said, work with the specialist organisations, with the charities, with local authorities, and crucially, make sure when people are coming to the country that that in itself is a much more easier and streamlined process. You can do things like biometric checks in a matter of seconds. So it's not that you have to abandon all checks to speed up the process. You can do that. We've still got the perverse situation where there are unaccompanied children in countries like Poland wanting to get to the UK, organisations wanting to send them here, and the government saying, well, unless we've got some permission, we can't. And I just think it's those sorts of things where the Home Office got this badly wrong. And let's be honest, when the situation was escalating, we knew there would be a refugee crisis. So why weren't we better planning and preparing for this eventuality?
Suella, I know you want to come back in, and I will let you. Let me just quickly come around the audience. I promise I'll let you come back. Yes, the woman there in the brown top. Yes.
Oh, hi. It seems like the strategy that the government has now is for peacetime, not in a time of crisis. We have people who are in a crisis and we are telling them to move from where they are to another country to apply. Why not talk to the holiday camps to get them, put them there, do the checks, then allocate them, but at least bring them to safety. Instead of doing all these checks, all this form filling, there is no empathetic approach to it at all. And it saddens me every day, every time, to imagine that you have got children who are on their own and we are telling them go to France and apply. Oh, somebody for you to help you. They need to know what your name is so that they can help you. It is so inhumane. I think we need to have an empathetic approach to helping others, to put ourselves in their shoes, to say, what would I want to be done to me?
Okay, and the man there in the middle, in the grey sweater.
I work in local government.
You work in local government, yes.
I'm scared of this crisis at the moment because the refugee crisis we've had already, we're not able to cope with. We're shoving people in hotels, we're putting them up in accommodation that's not suitable, and we're taking months and months and months to process them. We've got children that are severely traumatised coming into this country now with no family, no friends, and they're allowed to just, you know, we're not, there's no plan, there's no strategic plan, there's no local plan, and it needs to be addressed.
And when you hear about the numbers of people, was it 100,000 or more than 100,000 going on the government website and saying, yes, I'd like to give a home to Ukrainian refugee or refugees, that worries you, does it?
It does.
Because you think we won't have the resources to deal with it?
I don't think we've got the resources to deal with it at all.
Right, OK. Max?
It is a very difficult problem. I think the most important thing is not only about the refugee issue, but about everything. We've got to think long. This is not going to be over anytime soon. I think we're entering a new, very difficult era in which confrontations like this, not only a confrontation about Ukraine, but the real possibility that Russia might try to invade the Baltic states, and we may find ourselves at war. We've got to think long, and I do think our leaders, one of the troubles with leadership in the West at the moment is that a lot of our leaders are not very good at expressing big ideas in terms that everybody can understand. And we do need some real old-fashioned leadership of people explaining to the British people, the American people, the European people, what sort of new world we may be heading into and what sort of things we've got to do. And it won't be pain-free. And one of the things I know a lot of those at the decision-making end are worried about is what cynics call compassion fatigue setting in. That everybody is feeling tremendously emotional now, but in a month or 2 months, people, especially I have to say in the United States, they sort of move on. They think, well, we've had this issue and we've had this crisis. It's not going to be like this. This is a new world in which we need those in charge, and all of us who have access to any sort of platforms, we need to try and explain to each other what we're in for. And the refugee issue, which is the most visible, and it is wonderful how the British people have responded to this. This is only part of it. We're going to have to rethink an awful lot of stuff. We've been a very spoilt, fortunate generation. We have not felt threatened for a long time. Well, now it's different. It's not the end of the world. I think we will come through this. We will.
Well, it
come
might
out
feel
of
like
this.
the end of the world to Lesia sitting next to you
But
right now.
no, I don't think it is. I think even when you think of where the world has been, where it was after World War II, Ukraine was flattened in World War II disastrously by the Germans, and Ukraine rose triumphantly from the ashes of Kiev and Minsk and all the other cities that were destroyed in World War II to the ground. And I'm confident, especially after what we've seen of the qualities of the Ukrainian people in the last few weeks, that they will rise again. But it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, but we can't keep getting destroyed and destroyed just to rise again. We just, essentially, what we want is to live as an independent nation within our internationally recognized borders and just have the right to freedom, to freely choose our fate and to develop, to concentrate on education schemes, on health schemes for our people, on economic development at the end of the day, and to grow as a nation and as a country, and not to be invaded time and time again, crushed down just because some power-crazed dictator next to us thinks that we are part of a big empire. I'm sorry, I don't want my 3 children to grow up as slaves to and second-sort people to the Russian Empire.
Well, I know one thing very much.
Lesia, can I just ask you?
I mean, Clover's original question was about refugees and the response here from the government to bringing refugees over from Ukraine. We had Vadim Pristajko, the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, on the programme last week, and he said, I hope and I beg procedures will be dropped, every bureaucratic red tape should be cancelled. I just wondered what your view is.
The refugee crisis is happening now, and the countries which are most affected are the neighbouring countries to Ukraine. The refugees which the UK is getting, you're getting the people who are already in safety, more or less, and they are coming to, and what you're essentially doing is you're unburdening these countries which are taking the hardest hit. What the UK could be doing more is actually establishing facilities in Poland, in Moldova, in Slovakia, Hungary, and so on, where the children and the women could get the assistance that they need firsthand, where they can get the care that they need, and then to re-establish them in the other countries, such as the UK, and so on, and provide for them for safe passage, and provide also for them facilities to live here. So it is essential, especially when we're talking about children, please, it is essential that there are security checks. We cannot have another crisis developing on the borders. These children, they are leaving from cities which have been bombarded, that have been sieged. For them to come across the border and fall into traps of smugglers and human traffickers, that's just unacceptable. And that is a concern that we have from the Ukrainian government. That is something that we cannot control, unfortunately, once the children leave beyond the borders of Ukraine. But this is something that we rely on the UK and on the other countries as our partners to help us out with. Human trafficking is absolutely unacceptable, but the human traffickers are already fishing for the victims, the most vulnerable of the vulnerable, who are the children of Ukraine.
Can I just say...
What a depressing prospect is what I was just thinking, actually. Sorry, but yes, Suella.
Lesia is absolutely right that the security aspects are absolutely crucial to this, and we've already seen not just people wanting to exploit vulnerable refugees coming here, but also attempts to produce fake documents at the border and pretend to be refugees, to play the system and get here illegally. That's why checks, like touch checks, but essential security checks, are essential, because the safety of the British people is also a priority for us. Wes, a bit cheeky, I have to say, to make the comment about the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. We want to, of course, support families. Many of them will be women and children coming through. We need the Ukrainian government's consent before we take an unaccompanied child. That's important, again, for the security aspects, so that they are not exploited once they get to the UK. And finally, I must just say, I am very disappointed by the suggestion that there's been some kind of inhumane approach here by the UK government, some
well, it's
lack of
coming from the
preparation.
audience.
And I don't know why I take issue
It's
with
basically been your immigration policy for 12 years. You've been deliberately slow, deliberately obstructive, because you hope that other people will carry the burden instead.
No.
That's been the government's approach all the way along. Of course it has.
The facts are, we have a track record of which I'm incredibly proud. Whether it's the Ukrainian refugees, we're going to see many thousands Ukrainians arrive here very, very soon. Whether it's the Afghans, whether it's Syrians, whether it's Hong Kong citizens coming here. Since 2015, we've rehoused and accommodated over 25,000 refugees. That's a track record of which I'm proud. My father actually was a refugee. I'm a daughter of a refugee, so you don't need to tell me about the generosity of the British people. This is a track record which we are really proud of, which
we do
should
take
celebrate,
far fewer than many other
down.
countries, like Germany, for example, takes far more refugees than the UK does.
Well, no, I think generally as a country, we have a huge track record. As I said, we've welcomed 25,000 refugees flowing from many conflicts around the globe. We have a huge tradition. We are now setting up an uncapped scheme to welcome an unlimited number of Ukrainians here. Essentially, any Ukrainian who wants to come here will be able to, subject to some checks and subject to some procedures. I think we've got to stop talking this country down, stop talking our history of welcoming refugees and actually celebrating it.
Are we talking our history down of welcoming refugees?
We're talking the government down.
Absolutely not. I don't know where Suella's coming from, really. I completely agree with Wes that the whole system that the Conservatives have set up is designed to exclude refugees from coming to the country. Then they're bringing in legislation to say that if you've passed through a safe country, you have to go back to that country. Everything they do seems designed for us not to take refugees. And yet, as you said, 120,000 people have said, yes, we want to open our homes to refugees. So I think maybe there's a bit of a change, and the Conservatives need to actually start listening to what we're saying, is that we are happy to have refugees in our homes, and not just from Ukraine, but from other countries. And in Kettering, we've got a Kettering Refugee Assistance Group. We've been trying to work with the Home Office for months and months to sponsor a family to come to Kettering, and we haven't been able to get through the bureaucracy. So I think it is, as Richard said, you know, all these things are set up. The form fill-in, it's gone down from 49 pages to 30 pages. It's just ridiculous. And it is children. Over 50% of the refugees coming from Ukraine are going to be children. So why do we need all these checks before they get here?
Okay.
Yeah.
They
Can I tell you
here,
why?
as that lady said, they can come here and have the checks here.
I'm sorry, that's not in line with the security advice that we have. It's really important that we do carry out these checks before they get here, because if they don't pass the standards, then it's very hard to remove people who are here illegally. What's important, and I think this is really focuses mine, and it's something that I never hope happens, but we need to prepare for risks, and that's why we need to be prudent in our approach to migration and refugee policy. God forbid we drop the checks because there's political pressure and because ambitious MPs are making political footballs out of this issue, and someone gets through illegally and then they carry out an attack on British soil, something which is devastating. Everybody here would be rightly outraged that we dropped checks and we allowed someone to slip through the net. I'm not willing to take that chance on British people's security. It's right that we have checks, it's right that we offer a warm welcome to refugees, but we need to do it right.
Well, you didn't worry about security advice when Boris Johnson put Lord Lebedev of Siberia in the House of Lords, did you?
Right, OK.
What evidence have you got for that, Wes? If you're going to make an accusation like that, please back it up with cogent evidence.
Well, I think we need a straight answer from Boris Johnson about the advice he was given. We know Dominic Cummings says he was given security advice. We know that Boris Johnson didn't like the advice and put him in the House of Lords anyway. You're a senior law officer. And you know that what you say has to count because of the oath that you took. Can you tell us categorically that Boris Johnson wasn't given security advice about Lord Lebedev?
Well, I think it's
You're
really
the Attorney General.
important.
Tell us,
it's
give us a straight
really
answer.
important that before you start casting aspersions
No,
on
I just
people,
asked a question.
you have a
Just asked a
cogent
question.
evidential basis for it. I don't think it's very easy to get carried away, given the heightened conflicts and tensions at the moment, to throw accusations around about people who are innocent, who are law-abiding Russian citizens. Just because we have a fight with Putin doesn't mean that everybody of Russian heritage is a spy.
I agree.
And I think you should know better, Wes, than to throw around reckless accusations about people's reputations without any evidence.
You haven't refuted what I said, though, did you?
I am very happy.
Britain's relationship, and explicitly the Conservative Party's relationship with Russian oligarchs, is a badge of shame in this country.
Hear, hear.
Okay.
I've just got to rebut that. I'm sorry, Max, but we've just introduced unprecedented sanctions against a very high number of oligarchs, totalling billions of pounds, squeezing them financially, excluding them from accessing their assets, freezing their bank accounts. That's not a party that's in hot to Russian oligarchs.
Slow enough that Roman Abramovich could fly his planes out the country and get his yachts out the way.
Okay.
That was really handy, wasn't it?
No.
Yeah.
All right,
Exactly
I'm going to take another question. Timothy Buffery.
Whilst brilliant news, has the release of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe sent a strong message to all despotic leaders that the UK will now do business with you if you are a major petroleum producer?
All right, and of course this follows on from the Prime Minister's visit to Saudi Arabia this week as well. Richard?
Delighted to welcome Nazanin and Anousheh and I hope Murad back home to the UK after such a long period and such a gruesome tale. And I think that's something to celebrate, but I think there are also questions to ask. Why did it take 5-6 years for that to happen, and exactly what has been done in order to facilitate that happening? What kind of compact we have to enter into with what kind of partners for that to occur? But the realpolitik argument, I guess, would be that in a world where you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, you have to choose one. And I'm thinking that, you know, if the really urgent problem we have at the moment is applying pressure to Russia, then weaning ourselves off dependency on Russian hydrocarbons is a really important thing. And I guess that means knocking on a lot of doors we don't want to knock on in order to guarantee supply from somewhere else. I think it's horrible, I think it stinks, but I think it's probably a condition of the world we're in at the moment.
Lesia, do you think that's an acceptable way to go about it? If you're not going to get oil from Russia, we should try and get it from other regimes, no matter how unpalatable they may be?
Look, under normal circumstances, when it's peacetime, I sit on the Environmental Policy Committee and I actually chair a subcommittee on climate change. So my view is that fossil fuels need to be something of the past, and the sooner the world makes that transition, the better. And right now is the chance that the world gets to actually make that transition as fast as possible and to make way for renewables and to make way for new technology which allows us to use those renewables. So I don't think that buying oil and paying dollars to support regime, or pounds or euros or whatever, to support regimes which then take people's lives and that abuse human rights is the right way forward. I think that we are being given an extremely valuable chance right now to say no to fossil fuels and to solve two problems in one. Kill off the terrorist regimes that exist and the authoritarian regimes that exist around the world, and also make the world a safer place in terms of combating the climate change challenge which the world is facing today.
I don't think we can fight everybody at once. Even in the Second World War, when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, so many British people hated the communists and hated Stalin that they wanted to have nothing to do with the Russians. And Churchill alone had the wisdom, when one of his generals wrote in his diary, he said, "Would that the two loathsome monsters, Russia and Germany, drowned together in the winter mud." And that's how everybody felt. But Churchill had the supreme wisdom to just see that we couldn't fight everybody at once, that we had to embrace the Russians, we had to work with them. And in the same way now, of course the Saudi Arabian regime is loathsome. Of course I find it very difficult to say anything nice about Boris Johnson, but I will on this occasion. I think he was right to try and make some sort of deal with Saudi Arabia about oil. We can't fight everybody at once, and fighting Russia seems the most important thing to do at the moment.
But you don't want to fight Russia. You're saying that
No,
it's okay
I don't
to sort
want. We cannot have a general war. I don't believe that we should send our troops to fight in Ukraine.
Yeah. So I'll just go back a few questions back. It's naive to think that we are not yet in World War III. Russia escalating the aggression on the 24th of February 2022 that sent off the world into World War III. Essentially, Putin has been posing a threat to international security. Everybody is referring to NATO, NATO, NATO. Okay, there's another thing which preceded NATO that is called the UN, the United Nations, and the Charter of the United Nations, which is very much explicit, saying that there's a right to self-defense when there's an act of aggression, but next to that, there's also an obligation, a responsibility to collective efforts to defense and security when there's an act of aggression against one state which is a member of the UN. Ukraine is a member of the UN. It's a founding member of the UN. And so there is a responsibility of this collective security that we call upon. And the UN has proved to be useless in terms of the Security Council, but there have been precedents in history where the General Assembly actually made the decision to Korea for one. There were other examples as well, but nevertheless, it is the responsibility the world has to act right now, but if not for the sake of Ukraine and Ukrainians, for your own sake. There was a comment there about nuclear power plants. Ukraine has 5 nuclear power plants in its territory, 15 nuclear reactors in total. I think a lot of people here in the audience remember 1986 Chernobyl. So when Chernobyl blew up, the radiation traveled as far out as forests and woodlands in the UK and contaminated those forests and woodlands. Chernobyl was 1 reactor. Ukraine has 15. If Putin takes hold of any nuclear power station in Ukraine, he can just do sort of false flags on those nuclear power stations. He can have people press the wrong buttons or not press the buttons in time. And then the world is looking at a nuclear catastrophe never seen before, which will affect everyone, Ukrainians, Russians, British, Canadians, the world alike. And really, Putin won't even have to press that red button everybody is so afraid of. He will literally create a nuclear disaster by just holding those power stations. So when Ukraine is appealing for no-fly zones, for more weapons on the ground, for an anti-Putin coalition, for a stronger presence, a more robust presence on the ground, we are doing it for the sake of global defense and security and for the sake of all the people across the world, not just for our own sake, because we are a responsible partner of international relations, and we responsibly say we are sorry, but we cannot provide the safety and security of the facilities which are on the ground in Ukraine, and we need help around that. And it's the responsibility of your leaders to actually keep you guys safe and secure, and it's the responsibility of your leaders to act now to stop this plague of aggression that Putin is spreading across the world.
Manne.
Yes, we were expecting Boris to issue his energy security paper this week. Instead, he rushes off to Saudi to do a deal on oil, really. So I'm just wondering whether that's sending out entirely the wrong messages in terms of the renewables messages and the movements we need to make in this country.
Suella.
Well, there is an absolute need. The conflict has caused havoc with oil prices, and we're seeing huge amounts of volatility with the price of crude oil up and down like a yo-yo at the moment. And therefore it's right that because of Russia's output that we find other sources. Actually, from a UK point of view, we're not so dependent on Russian oil, and that's why we were able to ban all imports of Russian oil.
But we are, of course, affected by the price of oil.
We're affected by the global market. And actually, because of our lack of direct dependency on Russian oil, we've been able to go quite far. Contrast that with Germany, actually, who has huge dependency on Russian oil and gas and have, to a large degree, been hindered in how far they can go
The
against
question,
Russia.
Suella, is has the release of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe sent a strong message to all despotic leaders? The UK will now do business with you if you are a major petroleum producer. That's, in fairness, let's get Timothy's question answered.
Well, no. The reality is that Nazanin, well, first of all, it's a great delight for all of us in the country to see Nazanin and Anousheh be released, and I think all tribute has to be paid to all of those involved. That's the produce of a lot of discussions on many complex issues. It was right that we paid the debt It's subject to a lot of assurances that that money goes towards humanitarian causes, and it's right that Nazanin has now been released. When it comes to the Prime Minister's trip to Saudi Arabia, I'm really proud and glad that he's been there to try and seek to offset the impact on Russian oil supplies. Saudi Arabia is the largest producer of crude oil in the world. We have a valuable relationship with Saudis. It's right, therefore, we try and use that to encourage the Saudis to increase their output. That can have an impact on global prices, on prices for consumers. Do we agree with everything they do on human rights and their position on women and issues on how they treat their people? Of course we have issues with that. Of course we condemn them, particularly when it came to the killing of Khashoggi. But does that mean that we don't talk to them? Of course not. That would be foolhardy and that would be detrimental to British interests.
Wes?
I think they're two separate issues with respect. I mean, my heart burst when Nazanin and Anousheh came back to this country. I know how hard their MPs fought to get them back, how hard their families fought, and I give credit to the government and the way they negotiated the agreement that got them back. So, you know, I'm fair to the government sometimes. I don't know what's more embarrassing about the trip to Saudi Arabia, though, the sight of Boris Johnson going cap in hand to murderous dictators, or the sight of him coming back having not even reached a deal. It's like the worst of all worlds. And why is he in this position? Because after more than a decade in power, despite repeated warnings, we haven't dealt with our energy security issue. And I don't understand why, because there's such a huge overlap between pursuing our climate change objectives, which are really important for the future of humanity, and dealing with our domestic energy security. So we're not beholden to foreign governments who do not share our values. You know, if you look at the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the murder of Khashoggi, of course, the execution of more than 80 people, the way they treat women, the way they treat gay people. These aren't people who share our values, but we're in hot to them. Why? Because we haven't dealt with our energy security issues. And that's why we've set out our own really ambitious plan for new nuclear, onshore and offshore wind, solar power, to make sure that we've got our own domestic energy supply to make the price of fuel and energy cheaper for people here in Britain, to deal with our climate change objectives, but to make sure that future British governments, Labour or Prime Minister, never have to go cap in hand to murderous dictators ever again.
I'm sorry, but your hypocrisy... Your hypocrisy, Wes, is laughable. This is the same guy who campaigned for Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister in 2019.
Well, that's news to Jeremy Corbyn, Suella, in my case, I have to say.
Are we very lucky that Jeremy Corbyn isn't Prime Minister today?
You don't get to do this, Suella. You can't keep on saying, forget what we're doing,
Okay, hang on.
About the
if both of you
guy.
talk at the tell you what, if both of you talk at the same time, no one can hear. We've got about a minute left, 45 seconds left, in fact. Lesia, I want to give the final word to you, since you've come here tonight. I just wondered what your feeling is about what you've heard here from the panel and what you've heard from the audience.
You know, I can definitely say that the British people have been great to Ukraine and to Ukrainians. The heartfelt support that we receive every day in many forms, in your coming out onto protests, saying that you support Ukraine, in the messages that we're receiving, in the willingness of all the people to take the refugees, is just amazing. The sympathy, the empathy that is there, it is something that we look on and we have great comfort from it. And the people in Ukraine are able to go on and wake up every single day and fight for our freedom with all we have, because we know that the UK and the British people have our back. So thank you for that extremely. And I hope that with the UK, together with the government, with the Parliament, we can keep on fighting for justice, we can keep on fighting against the Russian regime, and we can build on this coalition, this new security coalition for Ukraine, but also for the world.
Well, our hour is up. Lesia, I know you return to Ukraine tomorrow. I'm sure on behalf of all of us, we wish you safe passage and good luck. Thank you to the panel this evening. Thank you to the audience here in Kettering. Very good to see you. And, of course, thank you to you at home for watching from Question Time in Kettering. Bye-bye.